right. We're going to send it right back to our social media center. Magdalena Doris is there with Dr. Telzak. Maggie, what questions are coming through social media, huh?
Well, we're popping up with the same types of questions. Everyone's wondering exactly how can this happen to them and how they can prevent it. So we're heading to Junie Maloney now. She's asking, what is going on? Can this happen on subways or from your home air conditioner? What can you speak to that, Dr. Telzak?
Right. I think the subways and home air conditioners are things that we're all exposed to. To the best of my knowledge, there has never been an outbreak, and there have been many hundreds of outbreaks that have been investigated by the federal government, by the Centers for Disease Control. There's never been an outbreak related to mass transit, and certainly not in the New York City subway. As to home air conditioners, many cases of Legionnaires' disease are not outbreak related. They occur in one patient, not in 100 patients like we're seeing now in the South Central Bronx. So is it possible that a single air conditioner among the many hundreds of thousands of air conditioners in New York might be responsible for a case of Legionnaires' disease? I think it is possible. I think it's highly unlikely. Certainly, I would not stop using your air conditioners when it's very warm, and by all means, I continue to use the New York City subway system. It's much safer than driving a car.
And we'll head now to a question from News 12, the Bronx Facebook page. This is coming from Kelly. She's asking, I live in Throgs Neck under the Throgs Neck Bridge. Are there any cooling towers in my area that we need to be worried about? I have a new baby and this is beginning to scare me. So we're finding out also that the health department may not exactly know how many cooling towers there are out there.
Right. At least by certain accounts that I've heard, there were probably at a minimum several thousand cooling towers in New York City, and maybe many more. Right now, there's a lot of evidence and pointing to a relatively limited area in the Bronx, which does not include Throgs Neck. The neighborhoods where individuals live, work, or have passed through that have developed Legionnaires' disease, and there have been 100 so far, which is a big number, have been Highbridge, Morrisania, Hunts Point, and Mott Haven. There have been no cases reported in this outbreak in Throgs Neck. And our social media individual was also very concerned about her baby. And for some reason, in the pediatric population, Legionnaires' disease seems to be very unusual. And so I would not worry about your baby, and I would not worry living under the Throgs Neck Bridge.
Thank you so much, Dr. Telzak. Yes, as you had mentioned, you're seeing people ages 30 to around 75 plus really being affected most heavily by this illness. We'll, of course, be fielding more questions here in the social media center. Of course, feel free to type away and we'll be answering them as well. We're going to send it back to Ray in the studio right now.
All right, Maggie, thank you so much, and thank you to you too, Dr. Telzak. We'll check back in with you in just a couple of minutes. Before we get to Marie, she's our next person on the phone. We want to get straight to our social media center. Maggie has some more questions on our Facebook and Twitter pages. Hey, Maggie.
From DK Frederick, he is an HVAC technician himself. He services these cooling centers, or these cooling towers, I should say. He actually services one at Concourse Plaza, which is one of the very two initial sources of this Legionella bacteria that we found out about earlier on in July. He's asking, being an HVAC technician, am I more at risk than the average person? And should all cooling towers here in the Bronx be looked at? To my knowledge, there's towers that customers are doing not too much about. Now, I'm sure the second part of that question, where there are customers or building owners that are not doing too much about their cooling centers, well, that will obviously, there will be some legislation coming, I'm sure, from the mayor about that. But is he more susceptible to this being an HVAC technician?
Right, so Mr. Frederick, I certainly understand your concern. You're in an area where a bacteria that potentially was the same bacteria that's causing these 100 cases, you're exposed to that particular bacteria regularly. I don't know if you use any respiratory precautions now, and I can't say with any degree of confidence whether you're at higher risk. I would, firstly, I think that there will be respiratory precautions that will be developed by the health department for those individuals. You've already potentially been exposed. I think what you need to do is, if you develop any symptoms whatsoever, you should seek medical care where Legionnaire's disease can be evaluated. It could be the common cold, it could not be the common cold. So I would suggest that you seek medical care early if you begin to feel ill. It's also important to understand that the incubation period, the time from exposure to getting sick, is generally not more than 10 days. So if you've been to the Concourse Plaza cooling tower more than 10 days or longer, then you're out of the danger zone.
And we'll get one from Tanya as well. She's writing in, are the symptoms the same as a bad cold, which is something you've been mentioning? For example, mucus in the chest, coughing, aches, and a mild chest pain.
Yes, I think sometimes it's very often to distinguish a mild case of Legionnaire's disease from a bad cold. What I would strongly suggest is, at least during this particular period of time, if you have symptoms that you're concerned about, including muscle aches, headaches, cough, sputum production, shortness of breath, fever, that to me would be an important indication to seek medical care and to be evaluated.
One question piggybacking off
Sure.
of that, do you have to be in the South Bronx? Do you have to be living in the South Bronx and you're feeling these symptoms, or traveling through, or can you be coming from Van Cortlandt Park or Riverdale or something like that and feeling these symptoms?
I would say this time, if you live, work, or travel through the area where this particular outbreak is occurring, you should have a low threshold for seeking medical care. I think if you live in a neighborhood where there have not been cases of Legionnaire's disease, I don't think you need to go to an emergency room. I think you can call your doctor, make an appointment. I don't think you need to have the same sense of urgency as you would if you lived in the neighborhoods where there have been many cases of Legionnaire's disease.
Dr. Telzak, thank you.
Dr. Landman, thank you so much. We want to get straight to our social media center. Questions keep pouring in. Magdalena and Dr. Telzak have the very latest.
That's right, Wade. We have a question now from News 12 Brooklyn, and they'd like to know, can Legionnaires spread to other locations? We're seeing this outbreak in the South Bronx in 4 very specific neighborhoods that are all connected to each other. They're asking, can this spread to Brooklyn or somewhere else?
I think that it's very unlikely that this particular outbreak will spread to another place in New York that's a far distance from the South Central Bronx. However, it's important to recognize that the bacteria that causes Legionnaire's disease is often found in many different water sources, in cooling towers, in fountains. It can be found in lakes, in streams. It doesn't mean that it has the same characteristics that it can still cause disease. But there can be other situations where all of the things are working in tandem for the Legionella to actually cause disease. Is it possible that a cooling tower in Brooklyn is contaminated with the bacteria that causes Legionnaire's disease, and that it becomes aerosolized and inhaled by individuals in a different neighborhood? It certainly is possible, and I think one of the things that's currently being considered is that there's a much more aggressive approach to defining where the cooling towers are and to making sure that they're cleaned in a regular and predictable way, such that the bacteria never has an opportunity to take hold in an area where it can spread.
I do just want to piggyback off of that. You were mentioning this could be found in fountains and ponds and lakes and things like that. We did have another question, which we won't put up on screen, but she was asking, is it safe to swim in city pools?
I would say absolutely it's safe to swim in city pools. They're heavily chlorinated. And if you don't have any skin reaction or allergic reaction to chlorine, I think the risk of getting Legionnaire's disease in a city pool is infinitesimally small. I would also mention with a very high degree of certainty that drinking New York City water is as safe as it gets. So there is absolutely no risk of Legionnaire's disease by drinking New York City water.
Both of those places highly tested often and also really under the microscope by many different city agencies. We'll head now to Lucia. She says everyone mentions water towers. I want to know, is it our water source for these towers that are contaminated, or is it the towers themselves growing this bacteria?
So in all likelihood, my understanding of this is that there is a small number of bacteria that colonize the actual tower. The bacteria can grow in substantial numbers, and the environment is such that the heat is extracted from the water, and what becomes aerosolized is warm water with Legionella. That's a perfect environment for the bacteria to grow and to be inhaled by an individual and subsequently causing Legionnaire's disease.
Again, these comments and questions keep pouring in. You still have the opportunity to ask away. You can find us on Facebook, News 12 The Bronx or News 12 Brooklyn, and we'll be here with Dr. Telzak. Thank you so much for answering the questions. We'll still answer some more as well, so we'll send it back to Ray now in the studio.
I want to send it straight to Maggie one last time, and Dr. Telzak in our social media center. Hey, Maggie.
Yes, we're fielding more social media questions as you guys speak in there, right on Facebook right now. We're hearing, shouldn't the South Bronx be under quarantine until this disease is really brought under control? And I know you mentioned something about this 10-day period. We can continue this conversation online. Again, we're searching, we're looking for these questions. We'll be answering that question that I just brought up to Dr. Telzak online as well. Please feel free to send us your comments. We'll try and get to as many as possible.
Maggie and Dr. Telzak, thank you so much for all the information and you staying on social media to answer the many questions that have come in to our station.